5 years ago, I bought one of the most complicated watches that Rolex has ever made, the Sky-Dweller. And I wasn't sure at the time if I was making the right decision. Today, after living with the Rolex Sky-Dweller for half a decade, I can give you a much more complete answer to that question. Not just what it is, but what it's actually like to own. When I first started looking at the Sky-Dweller, it didn't really fit the traditional mold of a sports watch from Rolex. It wasn't as straightforward as a Submariner, and it wasn't as purpose-built as a GMT Master 2, for example. Instead, it kind of sat in this interesting middle ground, combining a lot of complexity, but with everyday usability. And what drew me in was the idea of having both a dual time function and an annual calendar in a package that both felt distinctively Rolex. At that point in my collecting journey, I was just starting to appreciate watches. And I didn't just appreciate the design of this watch, but also the engineering of what it took to engineer the Rolex Ring Command bezel. And the Sky-Dweller felt like Rolex showing what they were capable of when they decided to go beyond just the basics. Ultimately, I ended up choosing this configuration because I love blue, and it struck the balance for me between presence and wearability, something I thought I could actually live with long term. Watching this footage back now, it's so interesting to see what stood out to me in those moments. You can tell I was focused on the dial, the finishing, the overall presence, but I didn't fully understand yet how the watch actually worked. And at that time, the complications felt more like features to appreciate in the watch rather than tools that I had regularly use, because that's how I made the decision, was I wanted a more feature-rich watch than just a Datejust. And I think that's pretty common when it comes to a watch like this. It does take some time before something like the Sky-Dweller really starts to make sense, but once it does, I fell in love with this watch, and that's why I still own it today. So at the heart of this Sky-Dweller is the Rolex Caliber 9001, which is one of the most complex movements Rolex has ever produced. It's really this and the Yachtmaster 2 that were the most complex. Now they've updated it with the 9002 movement, but the prior generation was the 9001, which was the original one launched in this movement. So it features an annual calendar, meaning that it automatically differentiates between 30 and 31-day months. So it only needs to be adjusted once per year at the end of February. That information is all displayed very subtly through the month indicator that lives around the hour marker. So you can see right now it's on the third hour because it's the third month, it's March. It also has a dual time zone function with a 24-hour disc in the center that allows you to track a second time zone. But what really sets this watch apart is how you interact with all of that functionality. So Rolex uses what's called the Ring Command bezel. And instead of relying on multiple pushers or recessed correctors or anything like that, you actually rotate the bezel to select which function you want to adjust, and then you use the crown to actually make the change. So for instance, you can adjust the hours. In this position, you can adjust the day. And if I were to turn it all the way counterclockwise, I actually hack the watch and I can adjust the reference ring and the minutes and the hours all at the same time. So the bezel on this watch is not just aesthetic, it's mechanically linked to the movement. And that was one of the main things that attracted me to the Sky-Dweller over the Datejust. That integration is not something you see really anywhere else in modern watchmaking. From a wearability standpoint, it's a 42 millimeter case with a noticeable presence on the wrist. We're talking about 14 millimeters thick and about 50 millimeters lug to lug. So it definitely has some wrist presence that not all Rolexes do, including the Datejust. But because of the way Rolex actually shapes their cases and bracelets, it does remain surprisingly balanced. It almost feels like an oversized Datejust in a way. So after 5 years, the biggest question is always the same. What is it actually like to live with? In terms of daily wear, the Sky-Dweller is more versatile than you might expect. It does work casually, and it also works in more formal settings because of the fluted bezel, but it definitely leans toward being a bit of a statement piece for me. And this is not a watch that just disappears on the wrist. In terms of durability, it's performed exactly how you'd expect from a Rolex. The case has picked up some wear over time, so you can definitely see I'm getting my use out of it. Nothing unusual there. And the bracelet still feels solid and well structured. And although there's a lot of fingerprints on here, the bracelet is actually in the best shape of anything on the watch because most of the time I was wearing it on a rubber B navy blue strap because I loved the way that the colors came together on this watch. Functionally, it still operates exactly as it should. I showcased the bezel a little bit before for you. Bezel action, the crown, the calendar transitions are really smooth. Everything remains really precise and consistent, exactly what you'd expect from a Rolex. The accuracy has also been very strong over the long term. I think as I've been observing it, probably loses maybe a couple seconds a week, which is pretty darn good for any watch. It's been a reliable watch, not just mechanically, but also practically. And that for me is an important distinction because with a watch like this, reliability is not just about timekeeping. It's kind of about whether the added complexity ever becomes a burden because there's a lot here. And in my wearing experience, it hasn't. It's actually felt like a point of pride for me that it stands apart from, again, something like a Datejust. There are a few things that stood out to me over time. First was the usability. So what felt initially kind of complicated actually becomes very intuitive and comfortable to set once you spend some time with it. Second, I don't often use the complications. The GMT and annual calendar are useful, there's no doubt about that, but realistically, it's a watch that I still wear because I enjoy it, not just because I need those features every day. That's definitely not the case. I don't travel much. The date is helpful. I usually keep the reference ring set the same as the local time, so there's no distinction there, but when I do travel, it is nice to have. Even after 5 years, it still feels like a very substantial watch every time I put it on the wrist. Now, the Sky-Dweller may not be for everyone. If you're looking for a simple classic Rolex, this may not be the direction for you. Like I say, you could definitely save some cash by going with the exact same spec on a Datejust. So a Datejust 41 in blue, for instance, you can still get the oyster bracelet, you can still get the fluted bezel. So it's a really nice combo, and it's a little bit smaller and thinner on the Datejust. But if you're someone who appreciates mechanical integrity and you want something interesting and are looking for something that stands apart to an extent within the Rolex lineup, the Sky-Dweller starts to make a lot more sense. It's especially compelling for collectors who already have the basics covered, and they're looking for something that's a little more technically interesting than your standard Rolex. Now let's ask the real question. Would I buy it again? From an emotional standpoint, absolutely yes, without a doubt. It's a watch that has remained interesting for me over time, and that's not something you can say about every watch in a collection. So that's really important. From a practical standpoint, I would absolutely say yes, but I do think it depends on where you are as a collector. If you value simplicity above all else, there are probably better options. Again, even an Oyster Perpetual would be a great option. They've got some newer blues that I think are fantastic, and again, are going to be a lot less expensive than something like the Sky-Dweller. But if you really want something that combines that everyday usability with a genuine mechanical depth, the Sky-Dweller is still one of the most interesting and compelling choices that Rolex offers. 5 years later, the Sky-Dweller still feels like one of the most unique watches in the Rolex catalog and the best values in my opinion. Not because it's the most practical, but because it represents something that's just different. And sometimes that's exactly what makes a watch worth owning. So let me know what you think. Would you choose the Sky-Dweller over something like a GMT Master 2 or a Day-Date? Let me know down in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.